Hi, everybody. This is Glenn Maurer, and this is another episode of the Next Step TV Santa Barbara, TVSB. You can see the show on Cable 17 and the Cox Cable System in Santa Barbara area, Ustream or YouTube, by Googling the Next Step TVSB for this episode that we're about to do and previous episodes that we've done. Today we're doing something a bit unusual, for me anyway. I have the pleasure of having in the studio with me Ernie Solomon, who is I think the reigning longtime host of TV SB shows. Been on the air for almost 20 years, as I understand it. Is that right?
We're going into our 19th.
19th year. Well, that's getting close to 20.
You're close.
And Ernie and I are going to do something a bit different. And on the Next Step show, we're going to talk about some issues that Ernie has raised and others in the community have raised about primary elections. It's called a primary primer, and we're going to discuss what is a primary, why are people all of a sudden talking about it. It's a subject that normally only politicians and party activists pay attention to, but this year, because of Donald Trump in particular, and because of Bernie Sanders to a certain degree, for the first time in 20 or 30 years, the question of how delegates to conventions are selected and how they go about then selecting the president nominees for the various political parties is really up in the air and causing a lot of controversy. Ernie, you wrote an op-ed piece. Welcome, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Glenn.
You wrote an op-ed piece that appeared in a local publication expressing your frustration with the primary process and how it's gone about potentially denying the will of quote-unquote the majority of the voters in selecting a presidential candidate nominee. What is the frustration you're feeling?
Well, the thing is that first of all, most people don't realize how the presidential primary system works. And secondly, it's a rigged system. Trump is right on some things and wrong on some things, but on this one he's right on. And because of him, as you said, and because of Bernie Sanders, this thing has come into the forefront. In the case of the Democrats, they have what they call superdelegates. And Hillary Clinton has about almost 100% of the superdelegates. So that means that those superdelegates comprise about 30% of the total votes needed.
Yeah, and I think for the audience to understand that superdelegates are not elected by the voters.
No, they're appointed by the party bosses. Right. They appoint themselves. So
yeah, let me just mention something here. You said that people do not understand how this works. A public opinion survey said that 27% of likely voters don't understand how the primary process works. So that's 1 out of 4 voters doesn't understand, in the sense they don't even know what they're doing when they go into the ballot. And 44% didn't understand how delegates are even involved. They don't understand why we even have delegates, superdelegates or otherwise.
Well, the superdelegates in Clinton's case, she literally has 30% of the needed votes to nominate going in, and that would mean that Sanders would have had to win 50% of the remaining 70%.
Right.
Now, that's not impossible, but it's pretty impossible.
Well, part of it, but I think my question always when people complain to me about this is that, do people understand what the primary election is? And I think the answer is, from the statistics we have here and otherwise, no, they don't. They somehow think that primary elections are somehow part of the constitutional process of the nation.
No, the founding fathers, and a long time after the founding fathers, never had parties, and they certainly didn't have primary elections. And the other thing is that when you think about it, the voters pay for the primary election.
We'll get into that in a moment, because that is the one thing that does bother me. But my general fallback position on this is these are the creatures of the political parties.
Yeah.
Political parties are private institutions.
It's a private company setting this thing up.
A private club, really, sort of. These are people who allegedly get together, create rules for their organization.
And the rules, once the rules are made, like for the convention, the rules are made by each convention.
Right.
So they can change the rules every 4 years. The rules change.
So when Donald Trump complains, or Bernie Sanders complains, that somehow the process isn't fair, aren't they really just? I really don't understand what their definition of fair is. Fair is the rules that were in place at the time they begin the campaign. The fair is what the party has done, and if people do not agree with the process that that party has imposed, then I think they should change it from within.
Well, the rules for the conventions are not in place.
I'm not talking about conventions, I'm talking about primaries.
Well, even in the primaries, there's a lot of holes in the primaries as far as even delegates that are pledged. And a good example, I think, would be with North Carolina. North Carolina said, if you don't sign the pledge to support the party candidate, we can take your votes away from you that you win as delegates as a primary contestant in getting. So Trump could lose votes on that basis. But the system is rigged.
Well, it's rigged by the people who
are
the system. It's their own system. I mean, it's going to be rigged for the purposes that they want it to accomplish.
But people, a lot of people in this country are under the impression that this is some kind of open, public. It's not like a regular primary for, say, a state senator. That works differently.
Right, well,
they win or they lose.
Well, it is like that. But I think people have to, a primary, I think maybe we do ourselves a disservice by when we talk about a primary election. If you talk about a caucus, where where party members get together in a room, which is how these things originally started. People from the party, back in the early days of the nation, the party members got together and decided, the senators and Congress people got together and decided who they were going to put up as their presidential candidate for their party. And that was a caucus, and that has evolved into other places. There were complaints about that, and by the end of the 1800s, we actually started having legislatures and states step in and require some elections where the party members can actually vote, which gets into the question that you raised, and I'm bothered too, why should the state pay for that? But in any event, if the party wants to choose its nominee by a caucus or by an election of only party members or however they want to do it, why are we complaining about that?
Well, because they're saying that this thing is done by primary votes. They're saying you vote for these people, and whoever gets the most votes will get the delegates. But the best example is that with Trump, again with the Republicans, Glenn, they have a party, an entire party structure that's trying to blow their own candidate out of the water. Now, how do you explain that?
Well, I explain that because these are people who created a political party that they believe represents the values that they have stood for 100 years or 50 years or 40 years, whatever it is.
Last week.
Well, whatever it might be, they have a longer consistency in their positions than Donald Trump has.
Well, then why bring him into the party to run in the first place?
He got to self-declare, just like that Bernie Sanders did.
Well, yeah, but, they let him in on the debates. There's a lot of things they could have done, but they never, I think, I've talked to people that know Donald Trump. I've talked to somebody on their campaign. Even Donald Trump is surprised how far he's
gone. Well, I'm surprised, and we all are. I mean, yeah. but I'm going back there. I mean, so I can understand why the people who have organized the party, set up offices, institutionalized it, want to protect it from outside people whom they might credibly say, you don't represent what we think the Republican Party or the Green Party or the Democratic Party or the American Independent Party represents. We don't want you taking over our party and changing it when we don't agree with that. So what's wrong with them protecting the integrity, as they see it, the integrity of their positions?
Well, because they're coming in late in the game and trying to move the goalposts. And I think even people, Glenn, that are not for Trump, and there are many of those, agree that the Republican Party right now is like a circular firing squad, and they keep trying to move the goalposts in the middle of the game. They haven't succeeded so far. And for lack of a better term with a lot of people, it's un-American. They think this is like a fixed fight or a fixed ball game where if the guy is winning, you put some dope into his glass in a fight and he gets knocked out. If it's a football game, you go on and hurt the guy on the other team that's a key player and wreck his chances to win.
Well, but I go back to this, if this was a caucus, as it used to be, and a bunch of politicians met in a hall somewhere, and then came out and said that we, the Whig Party,
Yeah.
have now chosen Millard Fillmore, or I'm not even sure if he was a Whig, but have now chosen as our representative to seek the presidency of the United States, Mr. Fillmore. And this is whom we're going to put up in the fall, and you can vote for him or you can not vote for him.
There's
but
nothing wrong with that.
Okay, so why is it different to complain when they limit in a somewhat broader scale, they allow quote-unquote true Whigs to vote, but not outsiders, people who aren't Whigs, to vote? Or even more so, why should everybody who wants to vote in a political primary be allowed to do so?
Well, if you come out and you say, we're not going to have caucuses, we're going to have primaries, and we're going to let the people in the state decide among these 17 candidates to start with, or 16, who is going to be the survivor or survivors. And then you start changing the rules because the guys that you really don't want to be survivors, or women are becoming survivors. That's a lot different than sitting down in a room with a bunch of guys saying, we're going to make Glenn Maurer our candidate for president of the United States. They've got a process in place in states like California and all the other states in the country. They're all different, but in California you can't cross vote. In other states you can. You can vote. Independents in some states can't vote in either of these major party primaries. And what they're doing is they change the rules as they go along if the voting doesn't come out the way they want it to. And so to me that's unfair. But if I know up front that Mr. Fillmore in his time was selected by the Whig Party, if he was a Whig, to run, I have no beef with that. I can vote for the other guy or not vote at all. But don't tell me that I can vote or not vote for Mr. Fillmore or one of his opponents, and then you pull him by the neck and get him out of the system because you didn't like my choice.
Okay, I mean, that's credible, certainly a reasonable position, but I'm still back to this idea that it seems to me that, to begin with, I believe that America would be better off if we had more political parties, would have more choices, and the public would understand that there's more ideas out there than the two centrist
The two
parties.
parties won't allow that.
I know,
They don't want competition.
and that's part of what's happening here. So a person like Bernie Sanders, who doesn't really belong in the Democratic Party, should have run in, say, as a Green candidate or a Social Democrat or some other party, and he would have in Europe. Donald Trump wouldn't have run as a Republican. He would have run in what would they call that party they tried to put together a few years ago?
A trumpeter.
But he knows he can't get very far that way either, because the two-party system is pretty much
Well, they have a lock on
constrained.
television time. They have a lock on everything. They've got a lock on the money. They've got a lock on everything. Even if the good Lord Christ could come to earth and run in this country as an independent with all the things that he espoused, and he wouldn't have a chance because these guys would lock him out. I don't care who you are.
they would destroy him. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question, I guess, that the complaints are often that if you're not a member of the party, you get to vote in a parliament. People seem to want the idea that you walk into a polling place and decide they want to vote in the Republican primary or the Democratic primary or some other primary this week, even though they've never had a history of association with that group. Does that bother you? Does it bother you that you can't vote in a Republican primary if you're not a Republican?
Well,
Registered?
the problem is, I believe that the whole primary system is rigged, but at the same time, you can't be an independent, you can't be a Green Party member, and say, I want to vote in the Democratic or Republican primary. If they don't want you to, they don't have to. Now, in some states you can do that. In California, you can't.
Well, you
Another
can.
thing, in California, they have a crazy system. The top two winners run against each other regardless of party.
Not for president, but yes, otherwise, yes, and I agree.
For the Senate and that kind of stuff. That's kind of weird to me, too. It blows one party right out of the saddle.
We're going to have, in the mail, all registered voters' families got this first document, which California presidential primary election, Tuesday, June 7th, 2016. And in it, there's some discussion, which I read, and I'm a lawyer. I've been trained as a lawyer, and I have to admit that some of this language is a little obscure, but it talks about the issue that Ernie was just alluding to, which is says all voters can vote in a primary election, headline on page 6. Voting for president depends on the party you are registered with. So far, so good. If you are registered with a political party, you can vote for a candidate running for president in that party. If you register with no party preference, you can vote in the presidential primary for the following parties. Now I'm getting a little confused here. You can vote for a Democrat, American Independent, or Libertarian. So if you're a member of the Democratic registration, the American Independent registration, the Libertarian registration, you can vote in their presidential primaries, even if you have no stated primary preference. I'm sorry. If you have no preference, you can vote in those three. You can select the party ballot at your polling place. So you go to you won't even see the ballot, so you go to the polling place. You can select it. If it's vote by mail, you were sent a postcard to select a party ballot. So you'd have to send that postcard in. They would then send you back a ballot for that party if you're going to vote by mail. If you register with no party preference and want to vote in the presidential primary for one of the following parties, which are Republican, Green, or Peace and Freedom, you must re-register to vote with that party by May 23rd, 2016. Now, if you can follow that, what it comes down to is that some parties have what they call open primaries. You can vote in their primaries without being a registered member of that party. Others don't. Republicans, the Green, and the Peace and Freedom Party, you have to be registered with them. So let's go back to the situation in California where there is, I think, some enthusiasm for people to try to vote for, say, Donald Trump, who are not registered as Republicans.
They have to change their party preference.
They actually have to vote, and they have to do it by May 23rd.
100,000 people did it, or more, did it in the state of Pennsylvania, so they could vote for Trump.
Yeah, so this is I don't mind that. Does that bother you, that you have to be a member of the party to do it?
No, it doesn't bother me. The rules are different in every state. What bothers me is that most of the other parties all the other parties are really locked out on a national basis by the Republicans and the Democrats. One is no better than the other. My personal opinion, and I've said this over and over again in recent weeks, I think the biggest threat to our democracy and our way of life is not Iran, is not the terrorist organizations. I think it's the two major parties in this country because they have dictatorial powers as to who can run and who can't. And I think that anybody who wants to run should be able to run and get airtime and all that other stuff, but they can't because it's locked.
Well, I watched, you and I are sort of, I think, junkies of the politics of America to a degree. I watch a lot of stuff on TV that most America doesn't watch, I'm sure, from MSNBC to Fox News to CNN to other more obscure channels. And in the beginning of this, a year ago, when this campaign was first getting its legs, and they got it early, you never saw a discussion of Bernie Sanders, for example. He never got airtime. And they always made fun of Donald Trump. There was no serious belief that Donald Trump would get anywhere. You watch over time where it got to a point where they couldn't resist Donald Trump. They gave him exposure. And they finally, Sanders coming grassroots up, got some attention as well, and they finally got to him. But the chance of them getting that kind of a minor candidate, if Bernie had run as a Green or Trump had run as a Reform candidate, the chance of him getting that exposure was...
He wouldn't get any attention at all. And the only reason that Trump is getting attention, one of the reasons, the main reason is he's very controversial, and it's good for the ratings. And you have to remember, most of the media in this country, the major media, is owned by entertainment companies.
That's right.
NBC,
it is
ABC, CBS, Fox News, the cable, they're entertainment people. They're not news people.
Let's go back to the question of these primaries. This mysterious kind of evolution from caucuses, from just groups meeting together to choose candidates, into an actual election to choose a candidate who would then run in the real election. We have to remember these are not real elections. These are not the real election. This is just a winnowing down process.
An exercise.
An exercise, that's right. So one of the really things that bothered me, and you mentioned it early on too, and I'm glad that I hear that for you to think about this. Why do the taxpayers carry the burden of running an election for a private political group to select its candidate.
Well, and not have a say in who they select in a lot of ways. That, if this exercise were run to the voters, for the voters that vote for these people, and you knew that if you voted for your guy, and if your guy made the grade, he would get the nod, that's not true. We're spending, the taxpayers are spending God knows how many hundreds of millions, maybe even much more than that. I don't know exactly what these primaries cost, but they're not chump change, to pay for primaries that the taxpayers really have no control of. It's like me handing you $10 million and say, here, do what you want with it. But that's literally what's happening with the money that we're spending on primaries. Because my vote and your vote, Glenn, doesn't really count if they don't want it to count.
Well, to the degree it bothers me in the sense that I am, let's say I'm a declined estate or an independent or a person who chooses, there are people who just don't vote.
And you're paying for that anyway.
And you're paying for this exercise in these other parties' politics. They're getting a free ride on the taxpayer who puts up ballot places and mails out the literature and does the counting and all that.
The teachers of California sued against the union because a lot of them don't belong to the union, and they didn't want to pay union dues because the unions use their money for political purposes. Unluckily for them, the Supreme Court tied it 4-4 because Scalia's gone. But it's the same kind of thinking. They're saying taxation without representation. And of course, the union contracts apply to them, which is another issue.
We won't get into that because...
But this is the same kind of thing.
I don't know if it's the same in the sense that these are voluntary groups of associations. They're not doing anything other than selecting the candidate that they want to put up in the fall when there's a real election for the rest of the general public.
But helping to pay for paying for these primaries is not voluntary. Just like
I know, I agree.
Just like union dues, you got to pay.
I think people. This was a reform at the time. I mean, the reason we started having direct elections, actually having public elections, was a reform to avoid these kind of backroom deals that were occurring where the insiders got to choose the nominees.
As to president though, Glenn, it hasn't stopped it, has it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Trump is going to. If Trump breaks through, I think maybe it has stopped it.
Well, yeah, but think of it again this way. The party is doing everything it can to blow him up before it even gets there. I mean, this is like saying, go do something for me, and when you start doing it, I say, no, let's stop Glenn from doing this, because I don't want him, he's going to succeed.
It's not the first time, though. I mean, American politics has many. I remember back as a young man, actually I was still not even quite a man then. You might remember this slightly better than me. Remember Estes Kefauver? Estes Kefauver was the outsider Democrat back in the early 50s, or late 40s, early 50s, who was sort of very popular senator with the public. He held hearings and cracked down on criminal activities and organized crime and did other things and got a lot of press. Tennessee, that's right. He was from Tennessee. And he was outside the Democratic Party. They didn't like him. He was a non-establishment Democrat. But he ran in the primaries, and I think he won 14 out of 15 or something like that, the ones that they had back then. But he went to the convention, and they still kept him out. And I think it was Adlai Stevenson that got the nomination because he was the establishment candidate.
But they did. But the people against him didn't actively come out in the party and work against Kefauver while he was running.
I think they did. When he won 12 out of the 14 contests. Kefauver, but when he got to the convention, they ignored that.
He was gone.
Yeah, and then later on, I mean, of course, I remember Eugene McCarthy, another outside Democrat who tried to get in and won a lot of primaries and still was ignored, and they ignored him and but ignore him because there was a big convention brouhaha over it. But I think it was Hubert Humphrey then they got that nomination. So it's not what I'm trying to say is, we're sort of acting in a way like Donald Trump's issue is new.
It is to the extent, in my opinion, it is to the extent where in the elections you were talking about, you didn't see top Republican officials talking about how we're going to stop this guy. I mean, Kefauver and McCarthy, they didn't come out, and the party, the Democrats, didn't come out and say, well, we got to figure out a way, on the news, on television, on radio, how are we going to stop this guy? Well, we've got a PAC and we've got money.
Everybody knew they were doing it. I mean, Hubert Humphrey didn't run in one primary, and he got the nomination. And so when you talk about denying the will of the people, it didn't help the Democratic Party, because that was one of the real chaos, disasters for the Republican Party was that election. But anyway, so what I'm saying is I'm not quite sure if it's that new. I'm not sure that it's all that wrong. The only thing that bothers me about it is that the public has to pay for it.
The good thing is the public's waking up to in fact, there was a great piece in the LA Times, I think yesterday or the day before, about the whole situation in Pennsylvania. And it talked about people saying, I didn't know this worked this way.
Yeah, that's what we're saying. Well, I think there are some things that we should talk about. In that case, I think Pennsylvania is a state where they have the delegates running for, you actually elect delegates. And the people you're elected, you do not know who they're pledged to support. So that becomes a bit different.
In Pennsylvania, about 70 or 75% of the delegates are not bound by anything.
That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah,
when you vote for them, you're voting for a person, and that person doesn't have to tell you.
We hope.
Well, hope they're still alive, but that person does not have to be. Doesn't have to even say to the voters, "I will vote for Trump" or "I will vote for anybody," particularly Cruz or whatever.
Yep.
When they're running, so when they're elected, they're free to go and vote without any constraints.
If these parties were told either you open it up and make it right, or you're not going to get paid for your primaries anymore, you watch how quickly things would change.
What I would like to see is the public wake up and the idea that the political parties are creatures that, they are the membership of those parties. They should actually rise up from the inside and reform it from internally. And the only way you can do that is money, and in our present circumstance with Citizens United and other cases in the courts, you're not going to break through that. These are major institutions. Okay, thank you, Ernie. We're almost done.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Juanita, for the work you did back there today. A little difficult with Ali out. And I'm going to close with a thought that I read years ago, and I've always thought was probably, maybe unfortunately, the caption that we have to remember. It's a quote that says, "If voting could really change things, it would be illegal." So maybe that's the truth. Maybe we know that we're not really allowed to change things by democratic process, but nevertheless, we continue to try. Again, thank you all. The show will be available on Santa Barbara TV, Channel 17 in town, and you can Google it for other locations.